Rorke's drift, when the few fight the many.
On the same day, the British suffered a humiliating defeat at Isandlwana. A small outpost called Rorke's Drift became the stage for one of the greatest standoffs in history. Fewer than 150 men, armed only with rifles and steely wills, stood firm against more than 4,000 Zulu warriors. This is their story. In 1879, in the heart of southern Africa, the proud and confident British Empire declared war on the Zulu kingdom. But the Zulu were no pushovers. They were fearless warriors, bred by iron discipline, heroic traditions and loyalty to King Cetshwayo. On the morning of January 22, at the Rocky Mountain of Isandlwana, the British suffered their bitter end. Nearly 1,800 British soldiers were wiped out in a matter of hours by an army of more than 20,000 Zulu warriors. Rifles and cannons could not stop the oncoming waves of spears and wooden shields. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield was covered with British corpses, one of the Empire's most disastrous defeats.
But the storm was not over.
Just over 30 kilometers away, at a modest riverside watchtower, Rorke's Drift, the tidal wave was rolling in. It had been a trading post, then a Swedish mission, and now the British used it as a supply depot and infirmary. The ramparts contained little else, 2 rows of brick buildings with thatched roofs, a few wagons, and a few sacks of corn stacked high. Inside were about 150 men, mostly soldiers of the 24th Regiment. The rest being engineers, colonial soldiers, and sick soldiers. Commanding them were 2 unlikely figures, Lieutenant John Chard, an engineer more accustomed to holding a ruler and drawing bridges than to commanding battles, and Lieutenant Gondal Bromhead, a brash, courageous young officer who was complained of being deaf and slow. Neither of them was destined to be a general, but fate had placed them there.
The news came.
That afternoon, the survivors from Isandlwana staggered back, their eyes glazed, their mouths stammering. The British are destroyed. The Zulu are coming to Rorke's Drift. Thousands of them. There were only 2 paths before them: flee or hold out. They had horses, wagons, and a river crossing behind them to escape. But if they fled, the wounded in the infirmary would be left to die. Worse still, the road into Natal, the British colony in southern Africa, would be open. Open to the Zulu warriors to pour in like a flood. Chard and Bromhead gathered their men. They said clearly, "The enemy is much larger. They are approaching, but we have a choice, to stay or to go." No one stepped forward. All chose to stand. The fortifications were hurriedly prepared. They rushed to prepare. Bagged corn was piled against the wall. Overturned wagons blocked the way, and chests of dry food were piled high to form a barricade. Every hand was busy. The wounded who could still walk also helped. Each man counted his ammunition, about 70. Then everyone held their breath and waited. The Zulu were jubilant, extremely excited by the resounding victory at Isandlwana. Without a moment's rest, they advanced straight to Rorke's Drift, about 30 kilometers from Isandlwana. In the distance, a dull sound gradually rose, footsteps, the pounding of shields. Like thunder, the Zulu army rushed forward. Black shields, shining spears, layer after layer without end. The British soldiers tightened their grip on their rifles. The battle began.
The first charge.
The thunderous cheers of thousands of Zulu warriors echoed down the ground, shaking the air. From afar, dense waves of people rushed towards the makeshift fortifications, like a fierce storm sweeping away everything in their path. Then suddenly, the crisp sound of gunfire tore through the air. Bullets whizzed into the dense formation, cutting down rows of warriors. But despite the rain of bullets, there were still resilient figures who pushed through. Rushing straight to the makeshift wall made of corn sacks, the Zulu threw spears, climbed up, and tried to knock down the barricades, determined to break the defense line. Inside, the British soldiers tightened their ranks. When the enemy closed in, they responded with cold bayonets, each thrust precise and merciless. Smoke from guns covered the battlefield, mixed with charging shouts and groans. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the defenses would collapse under the tremendous pressure. The Zulu warriors surged forward like a tidal wave after wave, relentless. But then, wave after wave of attacks were repelled, leaving behind countless fallen bodies. The ground was red, smoke and fire filled the air. The screams still lingered, The first wave of attacks had ended, but the tension in the air remained. Everyone knew that this was just the beginning of a much bloodier and more fierce battle.
The battle in the infirmary.
While the battle outside was still raging, inside the infirmary became a suffocating hell. Hundreds of Zulu warriors poured in, their footsteps pounding, their shouts echoing through the narrow corridors. Only a few guards and the wounded soldiers were strong enough to hold their guns and fight back, turning each room into a small fortress. The fire raged fiercely, licking through the thatched roof and wooden walls. Thick black smoke poured in, making everyone cough and choke, their eyes stinging. In the dire situation, they were forced to break down the walls, opening escape routes through each room. The sounds of hammers, guns, and screams mixed together into a chaotic melody of life and death. The British soldiers fired at each wave of attackers, while struggling to drag the wounded soldiers through the holes. Some were helped along, some had to crawl with trembling hands, but there were also soldiers who were too seriously injured to move. They stayed, calmly accepting their fate, their eyes following their comrades until the fire engulfed the room. In one small room, Private Joseph Williams became a symbol of resilience. He fought to the last bullet, then used his bayonet to fight back until he was overrun. When the fire died down, his body was found bloody with many spear wounds, but surrounded by Zulu corpses. The last infirmary collapsed in a sea of fire, the wooden roof falling with a creaking sound, the red light clearly illuminating the dusty and bloody faces. But thanks to bravery and sacrifice, most of the wounded were saved, prolonging the hope of survival for the entire camp. The smoke and fire still billowed into the sky, but in the hearts of the soldiers who remained, another fire burned, the fire of unyielding will, ready to face the next attacks.
The long night of terror.
Darkness fell, the attacks continued, the torchlight cast a flickering shadow on the barricade. The soldiers were exhausted, their shoulders bruised from the jerks, their hands torn from loading, but no one left their positions. Chard and Bromhead walked along the line, their voices firm. Fire slowly. Hit the target. The British soldiers passed around the scarce cartridges, some holding the butts of their rifles as weapons when they no longer had the strength to load. The Zulus surged forward, then were pushed back. This went on all night. Each hour seemed like a century.
Dawn.
At dawn, the drums gradually faded, the last groups of Zulu retreated. On the ground around the station, more than 600 Zulu bodies lay scattered. 17 British soldiers died, more than a dozen were wounded. The houses burned down, the defense line of Rorke's Drift still held. The impossible defense had come true.
After the battle.
When the news reached London, the press hailed Rorke's Drift as a miracle. The humiliation of Isandlwana was tempered by the, against thousands, feat. 11 Victoria Crosses, the highest honor, were awarded, a record number for a single battle. But those who had held guns there rarely thought of themselves as heroes. They remembered only fear, exhaustion, and their fallen friends. Many confessed that they had shot until their shoulders were bruised, their hands numb, and they could only move like machines. For the Zulu, Rorke's Drift was just one battle in a long war. Despite their extraordinary bravery, they eventually fell to guns and imperial might.
The mark that remains.
The Battle of Rorke's Drift will always be remembered as an extraordinary stand, where ordinary people, engineers, young soldiers, sick soldiers, chose to stay when everyone else could have fled. It is a story not only of courage, but also of the bloody price of war. From the ashes of the humiliating defeat of the British Army at Isandlwana, the glorious victory at Rorke's Drift saved some face, and Rorke's Drift became a flame of courage. Indomitable will and indomitability of the British Army.